6 years ago, Counter-Strike was a very different place. The viewership was much smaller. Many teams remained without stable organisational backing, prize pools which would be dwarfed by the numbers we have today. However, if you asked me to name some of my favourite tournaments ever in CSGO, Dreamhack Stockholm 2014 would be on my shortlist. A 2-day event with a total prize pool more than 30 times smaller than Flashpoint's recent seasons. And the reason this tournament sticks in my mind is all about the abundance of great storylines going into, throughout, and following the tournament. So we'll start our story in the aftermath of Cologne 2014. 2014's second major championship hosted by ESL over at Gamescom. And obviously the big storyline coming out of this major championship was NIP emerging victorious, claiming their maiden major title after so much success in the early days of CSGO. It was the same 5-man lineup which had the 87-0 streak at the start, but they'd never really got it over the line in the majors. They lost the first one to Fnatic, the second one to Virtus.pro in the final. And going into this grand final, the surprising part was NIP were not the favourites going into this grand final, and their opponents were Fnatic. So Fnatic, the winners of the first major in Counter-Strike Dreamhack Winter 2013. Coming into Cologne, recently they'd had a couple of roster changes, Crims and Olofmeister making their way in, and Devilwalk and Snyder making their way out. And coming into Cologne, they had showed good form online, and throughout the tournament in Cologne, all the way up to the grand final, even at times in the grand final, it was, you know, Fnatic were in some pretty serious form and they could play some really great Counter-Strike. And of course, at an event like Dreamhack Winter 2013, we knew that Pronax, you know, could call a great game. So Fnatic placed in the final of the major, and for many, they might have been in the they might have been the best team there, if that makes sense, outside of maybe sometimes in the grand final. If you look at the whole tournament as a whole, they had a really great event at Cologne. Another team we should talk about from this tournament was Dignitas. Dignitas placed in the semi-finals of Cologne. They lost in the semis to Fnatic, and this kind of summarised Dignitas' year. Throughout so many tournaments of this year, even with a couple of player changes swapping out the 5th player, they'd always shown great form online. They'd always shown great form in the early stages of the tournament, always looked great in group stages. They'd taken so many big scalps in early stages of the tournament. But when it got to the late stages, when you start hitting the big teams in the semi-finals and the grand finals, this is when a team like Dignitas started to fall apart. And it took a long time for them to fix these issues. Obviously, the core of this team of Dupree, Zipnix, and Device still remains today on Astralis. And it took them a long time to get over these problems and required a leadership change as well. So particularly at this time, I would say someone like Fetish potentially is to blame more for particularly some weak T sides in these kind of tight matches where they needed just a little bit more and they might have got it over the line. So another team at Cologne was Titan. And the French team of Titan throughout the end of 2013, then under Very Games, were for a period the best team in the world. And even over the start of 2014, even though they had some issues, they were still definitely a world-class team. But Chox came out of the lineup, Kenny S came in, and coming into a tournament like Cologne, this was like when we thought, you know, is this when we're going to see the Titan we want to see again? Is this when we're going to see the Titan back at top form? Is this when we're going to see Titan and this core of players back to the kind of their winning ways, at least getting to the deep end of the tournament? And in this tournament in Cologne, Titan came out in the group stages. Had a really poor result, and following this, you know, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And what followed Cologne 2014 was the first big French shuffle. Scream, Smiths, and MBK came out of Titan. Apex, Maniac, and KQLY came in from LDLC. Now, LDLC were the second best French team, but at the major here in Cologne, there in Cologne even, they made it to the semi-finals. Had a very close game against NIP, and even though they significantly outplaced a team like Titan in this tournament, following Cologne, this LDLC team got torn apart. We just said Apex, Maniac, and KQLY found their way onto Titan. So from here, LDLC, they had to build a new roster. They brought in Shocks, they brought in Smiths and MBK from Titan. Happy remained from LDLC's original lineup, and Kiyashima came in with Shocks, I think it was with Shocks, from Epsilon, who were also at Cologne. So lots of changes in the French scene and a new look roster in the form of LDLC. Now the next offline event after the major, or at least the next kind of international offline event following the major, was going to be Dreamhack Stockholm. I believe the real name for this tournament is actually the Dreamhack Invitational 2, which is just an incredibly unmemorable name. So I always call this Dreamhack Stockholm, this tournament. Now, coming into Dreamhack Stockholm, Fnatic and LDLC for many were the favourites. Fnatic, incredible online form, and of course in the major, we just said it, that you could definitely make a strong case. Even though they didn't win it, they might have looked like throughout most of the tournament that they were the best team there. So Fnatic coming into Dreamhack Stockholm were definitely in contention. LDLC had some really great players on this team, looked great online coming into Dreamhack Stockholm. So with all the pieces there, we thought it could come together and they could also be in contention for this Dreamhack Stockholm title. Of course, NIP was also going to be here in Stockholm. And they were, even though they had some issues of late, even though it seemed like only a matter of time before a roster change was going to happen for that team, they, at the end of the day, they still were reigning major champions. And coming into a tournament like Dreamhack Stockholm, you know, they could still be seen by some as in contention for that title. And then finally, you got a team like Dignitas. Spoken a bit about them already, but realistically, for a team that showed so much potential and so much skill in certain players like Device and Dupree, no, it was only a matter of time till they figured their stuff out. It was only a matter of time till it all clicked. It was only a matter of time until they really, you know, either took a title or took a big scalp in a semi and made it to a grand final and had a great tournament overall. It was only a matter of time. And coming into a tournament like Stockholm, some would have said this is going to be their time, they're going to do it. And obviously coming into this tournament, this was the first event since the French Shuffle. And just think about all of the storylines of these players, kind of these teams breaking apart, so many changes, so many different personalities, and now they're in 2 new rosters, 2 new looks, and we're going to see them both here in Stockholm. So going into the group stages, Fnatic and LDLC topped their groups. As I said, for many, they kind of were some of the tournament favourites, so maybe in that sense it wasn't surprising, but both of them looked in great form in this early stage of the tournament. And something to keep in mind as we talk through this group stage is that all of these games were best of one. It was a GSL double elim best of one group stages, and even though today that might seem very surprising and maybe should take some of these results with a bit of a pinch of salt, at this point in time in 2014 this was commonplace. We had this at the majors as well, so it still was definitely a case of if you were going to contend for a title, put up or shut up. Got to win these games, you've got to get through the group stages. For many teams it was much about kind of survival. And if you didn't make it through, you probably weren't good enough to win the tournament, and that's just how it works. So Dignitas were probably the biggest surprise of this group stages when they came third in their group. They didn't reach the playoffs, and in the decider game of their group, they lost in overtime on Dust 2 at the hands of a Finnish 3D Max team led by Natu. And even though this team and players would go on to some decent results following on from this, and stay in relatively good form, you still wouldn't have picked them to beat a team like Dignitas, and this was still a pretty big upset even in hindsight. So Dignitas had some issues, and particularly losing in overtime. You know, of course, there's a lot of questions about this team in this period playing under pressure, and maybe here they cracked up and they couldn't get out of the group stages. Now in the other group, the decider game was Titan versus NIP. NIP, the hometown favourites. I believe this whole tournament was played in the Globe Arena, so you would have had all of the Swedish fans around cheering for that team, of course. And this was still the long-established roster, still the same 5-man team, still the reigning major champions. So coming into this matchup, you almost certainly would have still picked NIP to win this one. In this game, Titan won. He was on Dust 2, a very close game. I think it was 16-14 to Titan. And towards the latter stages, if not the final round, I can't quite remember, Kenny S had a really great highlight round on the A side of Dust 2 to get this kind of match over the line. Titan won, they upset NIP and made their way out of the group stage and took a big scalp along the way. And going into the semi-finals, the first semi-final was 3D Max versus LDLC. And this match was a fairly convincing win for LDLC. And 3D Max, they won their group games, they made it through, but perhaps, you know, it was a little bit disappointing that we didn't see more from 3D Max in this game, and that we didn't get to see an LDLC Dignitas matchup in the semi-finals, because potentially that could have been a really great 3-map series, especially if Dig kind of showed up in the form that we'd seen in other tournaments, at least before the late stages of those tournaments. Now the other semi-final was Fnatic versus Titan. Of course, Fnatic, Swedish, hometown favourites, great run at the major, even though they didn't win it, and online they were in kind of an imperious form at this point. So Fnatic were definitely the favourites coming into this one, and many would have taken them to win this match. The first map of the series would be Inferno, and Titan started off on the T side, and this was just a total existence masterclass. 11 T rounds versus Fnatic, a team that would go on to have monster CT sides later in the year, and even at a tournament like Cologne, they still showed great CT sides. Existence, incredible calling, and in this game on the T side of Inferno, we saw KQLY all over the place. He was contacting him for kills, getting so many entries on Banana. And even though today, and with so many years of CS behind us, you know, this might seem more commonplace now, at this period of time, you know, you didn't see AWPers having so much space. You didn't see them, you know, being told to go in for these picks and opening up rounds and then committing behind the entries. So very different approach to the game than what we've seen from a lot of other teams, particularly, you know, teams like NIP, Fnatic, and LDLC to some extent would never have done this on the T side. So that was very surprising. And of course here, 11 T rounds versus a team like Fnatic with so much skill on it was just sensational. They took the first map in good form on that T side. The second map was Dust 2. And even though Fnatic lost the first map, coming into this second, you still would have expected a team like Fnatic, now having some pretty experienced players in, you know, Flash JLB and Pronax, you know, they're going to reset and they're going to at least make this game close on Dust 2. We're going to have a great series here. Now, Titan with KQLY and KNES had a very strong double AWPing combo. And here on the CT side of Dust 2, which is where they started on this second map of the series, they were in such great shape, both of these AWPers. KNES, the aggressive AWPer, he was the playmaker, he got given a lot more space. KQLY, a passive AWPer, he was just playing towards the A site, either car or kind of the ramp area, and just taking shots as they come up catwalk for the plant. And on this half, they got 14 rounds. 14-1 CT side versus Fnatic, who could just, you know, they could just play super loose and just contact out, and they was, you know, you'd think they're certain to get some rounds on T side Dust 2. On this game, Titan won 16-1, and the only round that Fnatic won in this game was an ace from JW with some sensational kills. And if that's what it takes to get one round in a map, that just speaks volumes about the quality of Titan in this map and in this series. Just an absolutely sensational series from some of the players, and particularly from the Existence perspective. You know, this was a really sensational series from him, and, you know, a lot of people talked very good things about him in the end of 2013 and potentially at times in early 2014. And now we were seeing it again. We're seeing why Existence was so highly rated at this period of time. Now, of course, if you're keeping track, going into the grand finals, it was going to be LDLC versus Titan. And of course, in this matchup, the storylines are just absolutely epic. There's so much history between these teams, with the player changes between the players themselves. Of course, you know, you can imagine that a lot of these players had not kind of moved away from their previous teams in the best of circumstances. So even from kind of the bad blood sense, there was a lot going on here. There's so many storylines. And if you just know a little bit about kind of potentially Source and stuff, there's so many of these players had played together on teams before. So from all of these angles, this was just going to be an incredible grand final from the storylines perspective. And coming into this final, LDLC for many were the favourites, and they looked great in Stockholm so far. Even though Titan had beaten NIP and Fnatic, you still probably would have taken LDLC to win this series. And the first map of this series was Mirage. And again, we saw that Existence was comfortably the best leader in this tournament, and seeing why a lot of people held him in high regard. They got 12 T rounds on Mirage versus LDLC, a team with so much skill, and they could play CT side with almost no structure and still win rounds. And Titan still got 12 T rounds. And something else you have to remember about this game and then the T side on Inferno against Fnatic is that shortly after this tournament, going into late stages of 2014, we went into what many would call kind of the CT side meta. And although this doesn't have that much meaning really, at least during this period, teams were much stronger on the CT side, and it was commonplace on pretty much every map in the pool to get 10, 11, 12 CT rounds towards the end of this year on these lineups. At least at this point, they were not a lot would have changed in these teams from this tournament to those later tournaments. So getting incredible T sides against these teams with so much skill, just kind of a sensational showing from Existence as an in-game leader. Now going into the second map of Cash, I believe both teams had a 9-round T side. So even though the CT side might have had some issues from Titan, still on the T side, Existence is firing on all cylinders. And this map went to overtime. Tournament is on the line for LDLC and Titan. Of course, you've got all these incredible storylines about the roster changes and them now, you know, battling it out. Overtime, LDLC back against the wall, and Titan won 4 rounds in a row in this overtime. They closed out the tournament and they lifted the trophy. So Titan, incredible event. And unfortunately for Titan as a team, this was kind of their peak. And they had a lot of issues following this event. The drop-off was quite steep after this tournament. And they never looked in quite the same form. And potentially, you know, maybe they were a bit one-dimensional. And even though they showed some great looks with using Kenny S on T side and double AWPing on CT, maybe, you know, it's had its flaws. Maybe they couldn't adapt. And maybe in following series, once these kind of top teams have been used to playing against them, they adapted how they were playing and kind of pulled out the flaws in Titan. So we never really saw this team playing at such a level again. And shortly before the Dreamhack Winter Major, the third major of 2014, KQLY got his VAC ban. And Titan, did they play? And I can't remember the exact circumstances. I think they played a last-minute qualifier for the major. I don't think they made it. The team never got to play at the major. And they brought in RPK. I think they used their analyst or coach in IOREC. I think that's how you pronounce it. But then eventually they brought in RPK. And just overall for this team, we never saw Titan get it back online for a long time. And it was quite disappointing that this is how this team ended after such a great run at a tournament like Stockholm. So, of course, an aspect to kind of discuss here is that, you know, KQLY may have cheated at Stockholm. He may have cheated as well at the Cologne major. We'll never know. And at least for me personally, I try not to let it kind of taint my memory of this event. And for some, I'm sure it does. But for me, the most memorable part of this tournament is all of the storylines, particularly coming off the French Shuffle. And, you know, in this period in 2014, it's something we don't see as much today, at least in the online kind of circuit particularly, is that it used to be the case you'd have a tournament, and then a break, decompress, content creators would come out, all the community would reflect, have some roster changes, then you'd go into the next tournament. And in this period, we had quite a decent break between Cologne and this event. So there was so much kind of boiling up and such kind of defined storylines by the time we got into an event like Dreamhack Stockholm. And potentially right now, with particularly this online play, they're getting very blurred, the storylines, where it's one tournament ends and they play the next game 2 days later. I mean, Vitality won Blast, I think, recently, and then 2 days later they play in the group stages of the IM Global Challenge. I mean, how can you expect a team to perform at such a high level? How can you expect to, you know, form great storylines? So in the storylines aspect, you can definitely make a case that 2014, 15 were better, and particularly that's why a tournament like this really stands out in my mind. Now, during Dreamhack Stockholm, Titan beat NIP, Fnatic, and LDLC, and these three teams dominated CS:GO. They might have won every single event for the next 6 months. There might have been a Virtus Pro win in there, but they might have won every tournament that one of them attended for this whole period of time. Incredible dominance, and Titan beat all three of them, Fnatic and LDLC, in best of 3 series on their road to winning Stockholm. And that alone is an incredible achievement, and in retrospect and thinking back to it, it's only a bigger achievement than it felt at the time. So, I hope you enjoy this kind of look back in time. I don't think I've done like a historic piece like this before, but I've done some content on this one in the past. I'll actually link an article I wrote a long time ago. The grammar's terrible, but yeah, it's still good at exploring all the storylines and stuff like that. So you can read that if you like. And maybe I'll do more historic stuff in the future. Maybe I could actually do some edited content. I don't know. Haven't really thought about it. Maybe I'll do some more just like talking head stuff. But regardless, if you like this, if you want to see stuff like this, comment down below what you want to see. Hop in my Discord if there's like a tournament that you want to see me break down. Certainly anything 2014, 15, 16. I can remember pretty much all the tournaments. And if I can't remember them, then I can look it up. Still make some good points. So maybe I'll do more of the stuff in the future. I don't know. But for now, that's the end of this one. And yeah, I'll catch you guys in the next one.